So for the first time in a long time, I decided to try a new modification on the Murray Off Road Mower. This is obviously the channel favorite mower for the most part, at least I believe it is. It's definitely my favorite mower because it's always held a special place in my heart. I was really disappointed when I blew it up, couldn't use it anymore, had transmission problems, had engine problems. I think we've got all that squared away now. But I decided to tackle a issue that I've had with this thing for a very long time, which is the complete lack of storage. Now, as many of you know, I drive this thing deep into the woods with friends. Sometimes we find ourselves a few miles out there, and the only actual storage I have on this thing is under the seat in the form of a very small trunk. I would say it's not even quite a cubic foot. I put my ammo box in here, which takes up 3/4 of the size of this trunk, and that keeps a lot of emergency supplies or repair items and tools at my disposal to use whenever I need them, should I have an incident out in the field. Now on my Sears, I built that really awesome rear rack that bolts on. You can remove it if you want to. The thing is invaluable, and having that on that machine has made me realize that I need to do something, find some sort of solution for the Murray along those same lines. So this is actually what I've come up with, and honestly, I didn't come up with this. This thing came on the back of my son's 110cc Chinese ATV. He broke it off when he was doing donuts one day, flipped the thing, and broke the brackets completely off. I was going to put it back on, I was going to weld it on, but I never got around to it. It just sat in my shop until one day I kind of looked at it and was like, what if I stuck that on the back of the Murray? So that is what we're going to do today. This is going to be a completely bolt-on installation. This is something you should be able to do. Your mileage may vary depending on your year, make, model of your machine. You can build one yourself if you want. It's not that hard, but if you don't have a welder, I found a way that I can actually bolt this thing on, so you can spend the $50, buy a couple of pieces of hardware, maybe some spacers and stuff, and screw right down to your chassis. Now, instead of going ahead and just bolting this thing on, I did something similar to the Sears where I use this. It's actually stainless steel coated wire. They use this for lobster traps. As many of you know, I live in the state of Maine. You can go to places that build lobster traps and you can buy remnants of lobster traps. Usually it's quite expensive. And I grabbed a couple chunks, good sized pieces, honestly, and I use it for building these racks. I used it on the Sears, and I'm going to use it on this thing today. As you can see, I've cut it out to generally the shape. I toyed with the idea, do I mount it to the top, do I mount it to the bottom? To the bottom I think makes more sense because it gives me a little bit of a little more finished look, and it gives you a little bit of space to actually to hold things in, whereas if you put it on the top, you see all my cuts. It doesn't look pretty, it's just not very good looking. So we're going to go ahead, I'm going to bolt this thing down. I've already pre-drilled all my holes. I test fit this thing just to make sure this was going to work, and I'll show you guys how it's done. Alright, so the way we're going to attach this thing is 4 bolts, 2 of which are threaded holes in the back of my rear arch of my bumper. I drilled a hole, tapped it with a tap and die set, or tap set, plenty of oil, and put threads in there. It's not the best metal. It's probably only 3/16 thick, so I mean it's kind of thin. It should be thicker than that for a good firm connection, but it is just a rack. And up front on each fender I've drilled a hole all the way through. We're going to do through bolts on that, and we're going to use spacers all the way around to keep this thing elevated slightly. I've got these as spacers. They're going to sit like that. I think these are actually like bushings or thimbles for a clutch pedal on a Craftsman lawnmower. I have a bunch of these laying around, so I think that's where they came from. But those are going to set like that, and the rack is going to bolt to it. You'll see that in a second. I've got a couple more spacers that go to the back here. That'll keep the whole thing just a couple inches off the bottom pan, or I should say the fender pan of the Murray off-road tractor. I still will retain use of my handles. I was toying with the idea of removing them, but the rack actually comes right across the top of them, so I could still reach under and grab them if I need to, and I usually do need to. So without further ado, let's mount this rear rack. I went ahead and I mounted lobster trap wire to it. It looks pretty good. I probably used like, I don't know, maybe a dozen zip ties on there, so it should lock in pretty well. I think I missed most of the bolt holes. I might have to adjust a couple of these wires to actually get this thing to bolt down properly. But, well, we'll see. Let's bolt her down and see how she looks. Alright, so to bolt this thing down, it's a series of bolts and spacers. As I explained before, these are the spacers for the front. I've got these spacers for the back. They're just basically small pieces of tube steel, like a sleeve for a bolt, just something to keep it, bumped up. You could use anything to do this exact thing. Just find a small piece of pipe steel and cut it. But basically, they will go, I got 2 back here. These 2 will sit up front with the wide end down. Loosen this one here. Washers on the bottom, obviously, so you don't pull through the sheet metal. Now we will set our rack on top of these spacers. Hopefully none of this lobster trap stuff gets in the way. Try to do the back ones first, since those ones look like they'll have the hardest time. Let's see if we can wind her in there. She's in. Alright, again, these are very finger tight. Now we'll go for the front ones. I've got nuts and bolts, washers for the bottom. This is a little trickier, whereas I've got the fender flares on here. Alright, that one's done. Alright, front's bolted. So now I'm going to bolt the bolts on the front side down first, because those are just a stronger connection altogether. These guys just wind right down. I think we're good. So there we have it. Rear rack is bolted down. It's pretty sturdy. I mean, I can grab on this thing, lift the whole back of the tractor, although I'm not going to rely on that as a lift point or a tow point for anything. I've got my welded rear bumper for that. This does leave enough clearance for my GoPro mount, which is right over here. So when I do eventually mount this thing, which I can just kind of set it here, that should be plenty of clearance for the GoPro mount. And also plenty of clearance for my seat to fully function and bounce and bottom out these springs. I shouldn't ever hit the rack. And also allowing me to just barely clear my trunk. But yeah, it looks pretty good. I'm happy with it. It's very simple, very sleek. A lot of people on Instagram and Facebook wanted me to actually widen this thing so I could store more on it, but honestly, having any storage is an improvement on what I had, and widening it was not really necessary, and it would also limit my access to the handles, which I told you before. As you can see, I can still grasp or grab the rack itself. It's small, it should work. I'm not going to strap a ton of stuff down to it, but when I need to, I can. It doesn't take away from what the Murray actually looks like. It's very simple. Again, bolt on, bolt off. I can remove it in about 4 seconds if I need to. It's 4 bolts, who cares? But it's on there. It was a simple install. It was really easy. A little bit more storage space. If I find that I don't like it, I can always remove it. I don't see myself, hating it in the future. It doesn't really distract the eye. It's not too big. It's not too small. I think it'll actually work out well. I know a lot of you guys wanted to see me put like a deep well in it, like I've got in the Sears, where there's almost like a deep pocket. But with this particular setup, you can see that wouldn't really be possible. Right underneath here is the top of the bumper, and underneath here is the fenders, so I can't really do that. I didn't want to raise it up much higher than it already is. I like the profile of it. But either way, this thing's going to be back on the trails real soon. The engine's ready to go. I got to do a couple little cosmetic painty thingies. Outside of that, I think next time you see this thing, it'll be running and driving around my yard. And hopefully reliable. So stay tuned for that, and thanks for sticking with me, you guys, and I will see you next time.